Alright YouTube, so what you're looking at there is the prepared bolt hole for the Cal 20. I've just mixed up some epoxy and I have just a rectangular piece of 4-ounce laminate cut into a cone, or folded into a cone and snipped so that it will spread out. Hopefully you can see all that. And then basically I'm going to wet it out. The idea here is that, as I said in a couple other videos, the bolt holes have been a pretty frustrating part of this whole experience because they don't have a lot of, they're just big enough for the bolts themselves, at least the ones I have. So there's not a lot of room for error as far as like trying to avoid exposing the metal, which is the main idea here. So what I'm trying to say as I'm doing this is, you know, if you take, if you slop some fiberglass in there to try to cover up the cast iron, which is what this keel is made out of, and then you try to sand it back out so it's just big enough for the bolt to go in, you're gonna hit the metal unless you get really lucky, which I didn't. So anyway, the point of all this is just to lay a lot of thin 4-ounce layers in here, and I'll show you the back side. So now I'm just cutting little scraps to just kind of build up where I think there might be a gap. So the laminate, the reason I'm using the laminate is not structural, it just tends to hold a little more resin and hold it evenly, because that's the trouble with just using, say, thickened resin, you know, with a filler, is that you slop it in there and you're back where you started, where you don't really know if you're gonna, in the process of sanding it to make it big enough for the bolt to go through, you're not 100% sure you're going to avoid sanding through it. So this seems to be, so when this is finished, you basically have to go through here and sand it out very gently, just with a rolled up piece of sandpaper by hand, and then it should work out. So that's the front side. When I'm finished with this next one up the keel, I'm going to show you how I do the back, and that's by taking some, get a little air bubble out here, that's by taking some 10-ounce cloth. Again, this is 4-ounce because it needs to be nice and thin, and it needs to lay down over the edges nicely. 10-ounce tends to be kind of stiff, and that's a little problematic when you're trying to fold it over stuff. Corners, edges, it tends to pop up, and then you wind up having to smush it back down. Excuse me. And in the process of doing that, you sometimes wind up creating voids. So 10 ounces, it'll avoid you having to put some layers on them. I am almost always using 10 ounce, but sometimes I like to use a thinner laminate, which is what I'm doing here. Okay. Now right now it's February in Florida, but it's pretty hot. It's well into the 80s and it's very humid. So what I'm doing is using slow hardener. That's the West System 206, I think. And I should have enough time before it starts to cure to get these last 2 holes done. I've already done all 4 on the other side, and I've already done 2 on this side. Okay, and then once I get the other side stuff put on the other side, I tend to just kind of get in here and make sure I've got it pushed around against the outside of the hole. Okay. And if you see any air bubbles, you can kind of gently pat them out if your gloves aren't too sticky. If they are, that's, you know, that's can lead to some problems. And sometimes I'll just throw a little extra in there. Go pretty nicely. Okay. So, if you've been watching the videos, if you're one of the 3 people who've been watching them, the idea here is, again, to avoid the problems that I've been having with the bolt holes. So, it's worked nice enough on the other side. I was able to get the bolts back through without exposing the middle, which again is cast iron and hence rusts if you look at it wrong. So I'll cut one real quick. And if I keep, so let me move the camera over to this last one. You're going to see the same thing basically. So I'm doing the exact same thing in this one. And then I'll move the camera at the end. So see, I just take a square, I fold it into a cone, kind of pull it through from the other side, and then while I'm holding it from the other side, I just make some cuts around the edge. Again, since it's 4 ounce, you don't have to be too precise. If you've ever tried to glass around a corner, you know what an absolute pain in the ass it can be if the glass is stiff enough. Okay. And what I'm going to hope to do here is get this one on here and wet it out before it starts to go off. I was just about to start the 3rd hole on the other side when the resin started to kick off. Okay. So that's looking good. Okay, so once that initial square is in there, I kind of build up the inside with little scraps. Just cut little, take a piece of 4 ounce cloth like this, just cut little corner scraps off of it like so. And then just stick them on the inside here. This gives you like a little bit of extra thickness, and I think builds it up pretty nicely. And again, the advantage of laminate is that as you're sanding it down, you don't have to, you're not flying blind while you're trying to sand it back down to open up the hole enough to get the bolt through. You know, so if you just put thickened epoxy in there, you can't really see, you know, if you've got it, if you're right in the center. And anyway, I'm probably not making a whole lot of sense right now because I'm sort of a little distracted doing this while I'm talking. And also it's a little touch and go even doing it like this. It's real easy to like move this laminate around, you know, and you're not trying to. Kind of, if you pull it too far out of whack, the whole thing is, you know, is kind of useless. So you do have to be a little careful. Okay. I think I'm just about getting there. I do a little bit of overkill building it up just because it's easier to sand this way. Okay. Now, let me see if I can, again, before this resin starts to go, so it's not warm yet, so I should be in good shape. I'll show you what I did on the other side. So I realize that's not very close, but what I do on the other side, you can see where this kind of sticks out, which is good. We want a little bit sticking out because it's going to hold some resin against the hole. Then I just take some small strips like this, just a scrap of 10 ounce. And just cut little rectangular strips out of it. And then I sort of build up against the edge of the hole on the outside. Because that was trial and error is how I've learned any of this. And I as I was sanding the top of the holes last time in preparation for laying laminate over the keel flange here, I sanded back through, so I wanted something a little thicker to hold up here. Okay, so this is good. I'm going to wet these out. So again, none of this is really structural in the sense that it's got to like withstand to a lot of bending or anything like that. The point of this is just the laminate at all is just to hold resin on the thinner, where it tends to go on really thin, like the edges. You know, you just you need something to hold the liquid there. Okay, so again, okay, so just kind of, it's a little touch and go, but you just kind of stick it. Push from the in the middle, just careful not to pull it too far out of whack. And that's it. Okay. And normally I would say wear a mask while you're doing this. The reason I'm not is because I'm kind of talking through the video, but I would almost certainly be wearing a mask under these circumstances. So anyway, as far as progress goes, I'll lift up the camera here. So I've got, let's see, sorry about the camera shaking. Okay, so what I've done, this is the second side of the keel. You can kind of look down here, it's already been flipped over. The flange here, I put a piece of laminate going over, oops, just bumped into my repair, that's genius. Okay. Fix that. Well, anyway, I'll show you when the whole keel is done, but I have a piece of laminate going over the flange from starting at about 3 or 4 inches below it, wrapping all the way around to slightly past the midpoint, and then I'm going to layer another one from this side, so they'll just overlap a little bit at the middle of the top of the keel. And then I sand that down. I tape off the holes first. I'm going to try to point to them. There. I sand the whole thing down, and then the middle of the keel, the flat part, gets a couple layers of 10 ounce as well. The edges are already done with laminate. The bulb's already done with laminate. And then I sand the whole thing down just enough to rough it up, smooth it out, and then the next step is to get epoxy barrier coat onto the parts of the boat that I have access to right now, get the keel back on. Once it's sitting on the way to the keel, I can take off some of this the structure of the trailer and get to the parts of the hull that were underneath these boards, because I have boat stands holding up the corners that'll keep it from tipping over. So anyway, that's the plan, but I'll talk more about that when I get to it. I just wanted to show how this is done. Like I said, normally I don't really show how stuff is done because there's plenty of videos that'll show you how to, patch a hole or fill something and ferret it out. That's kind of standard stuff. But when there's kind of a weird particular thing about the Cal 20 that I've been having trouble with, I figured maybe some other people are going to want some help with it too. So anyway, we'll see you at the next one.